What a difference a week makes in Formula 1, as the front runners were so much closer together on the narrow Zandvoort circuit with a strategic battle. But one constant through it all is the fact that Max Verstappen has continued to perform so well in his Red Bull car and can compete on any circuit. There's a lot to talk about, so here's my 5 things we learned from the Dutch Grand Prix. My name's Andy and this is Behind the Drive. The one constant is Max Verstappen. Max Verstappen's second home Grand Prix was a strategic race. Verstappen took a solid pole position in a competitive Saturday session where 3 teams were in the mix. Red Bull went for the 2-stop strategy, and it was only Verstappen that had the pace on that strategy to take the fight to the Mercedes team, who were on the 1-stop approach. All the other drivers in those top teams, from Perez to Sainz and even Leclerc, were nowhere near the pace of Max Verstappen on this occasion. It shows just how well Verstappen is racing and how good that Red Bull is this season. There was a situation before the late safety cars where Verstappen would have needed to overtake the Mercedes cars on track in order to win the race. It was shaping up to be a great conclusion to the Grand Prix, but I think most people would be confident in Verstappen making those moves stick. From that point, the race swung in each of the team's favour in those closing stages, and to be honest, the one constant in Formula 1 at the moment is Max Verstappen fighting for and generally getting the race wins regardless of who he's competing with. Last year saw Verstappen's first title fight. This year has been his first championship dominance. He's been the best driver so far this year by such a long way, and the performances like this one shows how he can put a gap between him and his opposition. On the safety car restart towards the end, Verstappen had an awesome launch, overtaking Hamilton just beyond the start-finish line. From there, he won at a canter, so it's clearly a green box for Verstappen and Red Bull for a great home Grand Prix victory. Before we look at Mercedes next, I want to ask you to consider subscribing to Behind the Drive. Most of you watching haven't yet hit that subscribe button, so if you do enjoy these videos, make sure you hit subscribe. Thanks. Mercedes takes a risk, and it almost pays off. This weekend, Mercedes looked much closer than they did last weekend in Belgium. With the car being particularly draggy on the long straights in Spa, it meant that they were far off the qualifying pace of the Ferraris and Red Bulls. But come this weekend, their car had come into its own, and if it wasn't for Perez's spin in the final Q3 runs, Hamilton could have been in the mix for pole position, although I believe that's still optimistic based on a quick look at the data. One of the few strengths of the Mercedes W13 is the fact that it tends to be good on its tyres, and also tends to have strong race pace. With the drivers starting 4th and 6th, the team went for a medium compound tyre for the start of the race, knowing that there was the potential for a 1-stop or a 2-stop strategy working through the Grand Prix. As a result of these factors, the Mercedes drivers ended up extending the first stint longer than any other team, and they continue to have decent pace relative to the cars behind them. They were running 1-2 at the time, and so with track position, they knew that the drivers behind would need to make an overtake work on track if they wanted to get past the Mercedes runners. It was a fascinating situation, and they were able to hold the others behind until, of course, Max Verstappen made the overtake on George Russell on lap 28 and started to hunt Lewis Hamilton down. Given Mercedes' season so far, this is exactly the kind of strategy and approach that the team needs to adopt in order to find a way to win a race this year. They are slower than the Red Bulls in race trim, and slower than both of the Red Bulls and Ferraris in qualifying trim. So seeing these approaches and running for 30 laps on the first stint made for an interesting Grand Prix. Once the Mercedes cars were on the hard tyres, they looked rapid once again, as they added more pressure on the 2-stop runners. Perhaps the cooler conditions on Sunday meant that the tyre degradation was less than it had been through the rest of the weekend, but the later virtual safety car, which allowed Verstappen to stop under the slower conditions, meant it had gone from Verstappen needing to overtake both Mercedes cars in order to win, to go to the Mercedes cars having to chase down the Red Bull leader, a task which was always going to be difficult. It's a shame we didn't get to see the ending that it was shaping up to be. In the end, with Verstappen on fresh soft tyres and both Mercedes drivers running on used medium compound tyres, the team opted to stop Russell at the safety car for a set of softs for the safety car restart. They did this and lost the track position to Verstappen. For me, I think it was always going to be Verstappen's race after the final safety car, and to be honest, stopping for softs was clearly necessary in order to maintain the competitiveness with the Ferraris and the other Red Bull. Even if they'd have tried to use Russell as a roadblock for Lewis Hamilton, Verstappen would have got by with ease, and getting by Hamilton would have been even easier after a couple of laps of tyre warm-up on the soft compound. It was a no-brainer to stop. But in their desperation to win a race, the team didn't opt to give Hamilton the soft tyres that could have kept him in the fight and perhaps given the team a double podium. For me, the team needed to try something different in order to get that elusive win in 2022. Russell made the right call to the team to ask for the stop and to get onto the soft tyres that allowed him to hold on to second and his best result for Mercedes and equalling the best result of his career. There will be a lot to talk about in their debrief, but the pace was good. Hopefully there are circuits in the latter stages of the season that they can compete on as well. So for me, it's an amber box for Mercedes, as there is a lot to learn from this race, and rightfully, Hamilton will be quite frustrated that he was left on those medium tyres. An opportunity for the midfield runners. With this circuit being significantly different to previous tracks on the calendar, there were more opportunities for some of the teams lower down in the championship order to fight their way into the top 10. In qualifying, Lance Stroll, Mick Schumacher and Yuki Tsunoda all snuck into Q3, which was brilliant for all of their respective teams. With overtaking not easy to come by on the Zandvoort circuit, these cars had a great chance to produce a decent result for their teams. Of course, points are handed out on a Sunday, and with the Alpines of Fernando Alonso and Esteban Ocon a little bit further down the order, these drivers would always be under pressure. For Schumacher, his chances of holding on to points ended after a disappointing first pit stop. For Tsunoda, he was overtaken by Alonso through the first stint, and then his dramatic pit box exit where he thought the tyres weren't fitted when the team believed that they were. But Lance Stroll did well to hold on to 8th position for the majority of the race in the early stages, and then benefited from that Tsunoda problem to keep himself in a points-paying spot. In the end, it was Lance Stroll that kept going and got 10th position, and there may even be further developments to that with Sainz's questionable move under yellow flags on Esteban Ocon. It was impressive to hold on to that spot in the Aston Martin car, given the number of safety cars and how bunched up the field was towards the end. So it was great to see the opportunities come for the midfield runners, and it's a green box for Lance Stroll, as he was the only one of these to capitalise on his great opportunity. Occasionally we see these kinds of races for Stroll, and he really needs to improve his consistency if he ever wants to progress in his Formula 1 career. Another Ferrari error-filled race. Ferrari have once again made a procedural error in the pits as Carlos Sainz came in for his first stop. The team seemed completely underprepared, and they didn't have the right tyres at the right time as the rear left tyre was simply not there in time for the stop. It looked like the mechanic got caught behind their colleagues in the pits, and so he was late to get that part to the car. Even Mattia Binotto described the situation as a mess on this occasion, as he finally acknowledged the fact that his team had made an error, something that he seemed to fail to acknowledge or recognise regarding the team's strategic mistakes earlier this year. Not only was the stop bad for themselves, but the mechanics left a reserve wheel gun out in the open, which restricted Sergio Perez from getting out of his pit box, which meant the Red Bull driver had no choice but to drive over the wheel gun on this occasion. This is something that will be investigated after the race and will surely result in some kind of fine or penalty, as they've hindered their rivals on this occasion. As for the classic strategy confusion, Ferrari started to work their way through the alphabet once again as Leclerc looked to be in no man's land as he didn't have the pace to keep himself in the mix without that safety car. The team seemed to not know what they needed to do to beat the Mercedes cars. In the end, they got leapfrogged by Mercedes with an unfortunately timed pit stop for Leclerc as he stopped just before the virtual safety car. From that point, there was Carlos Sainz, who looked like he made an overtake under yellow flags on Esteban Ocon, as well as a 5-second time penalty for the unsafe release, where Sainz struggled to get out of his pit box with the McLaren mechanics right in front of him, as he blocked the Alpine car behind. So I expect Ferrari are racking up the fines and penalties on this occasion, and it's as if they didn't show up this weekend once again. There's a lot for them to work on, so it's clearly another red box for Ferrari and their strategic and pit stop blunders. Daniel Ricciardo's quiet exit from McLaren. Daniel Ricciardo's future is uncertain in Formula 1. He's lost his McLaren seat due to his poor performances over the last 2 years, and this weekend's performance has once again shown why the team have made that decision. While Norris was fighting for the best of the rest spot and was in the mix with the top teams, Daniel Ricciardo finished 17th, the penultimate finishing car, and was only ahead of Nicholas Latifi. That McLaren car should be in the mix for the best of the rest spot, and when the team is fighting Alpine for 4th in the championship, they absolutely need 2 cars in the fight. Lando Norris ended up 7th on this occasion and was right in the mix with Alonso for 6th. To have Ricciardo literally nowhere in this race shows why his time is up in that team. With his future uncertain, you'd hope that Ricciardo would be trying his best to leave on a high and try and show that he can still compete and is worth a shot for one of the lower teams in the order. But performances like this one in Zandvoort feels like he's lost his confidence and lost his way in the sport. There's a lot to work on and we'll have to see how he gets on, but it's a red box for this performance for Daniel Ricciardo today. Honourable mentions. After a tough qualifying performance yesterday, both Alpines made a charge in the race. Alonso was one of the first of the runners to try a hard compound tyre, which worked well on Sunday, and it was 6th and 9th for the team in the end as they managed to continue to build their lead on McLaren, who, as I mentioned earlier, seemed to be fighting with one driver. So those are my 5 things we learned from the Dutch Grand Prix. Make sure you watch this video next to learn more about Ricciardo's challenge for the rest of the year.